tensions between the United States and China are rising. The United States is seeking closer military relations with India, Japan and Australia against China. The countries, which are known as the Quad, are close U.S. allies. The alliance is set to resemble the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to confront, quote, potential challenge from China. State Department officials claim the alliance is aimed at creating a critical mass around the shared values and interests of those parties in a manner that attracts more countries in the Indo-Pacific and even from around the world.
I think it remains to be seen how this initiative will work out as far as an anti-China NATO in the so-called Indo-Pacific region. To start with, there is no such thing as the Indo-Pacific region. This is purely a geopolitical invention to try to pull together an arc of countries that just happen to be surrounding China in the same way we tried to surround Russia with the first NATO, as though one NATO were not bad enough.
U.S. officials say the group of 4 nations is expected to meet in Delhi sometime this autumn. Australia's possible participation in India's Malabar naval exercise is cited as an example of progress towards a more formal defense bloc. State Department officials also suggested that Washington would like to see South Korea, Vietnam and New Zealand to eventually join an expanded version of the Quad. China has warned the U.S. against ambitions to create a NATO-like military alliance in the Pacific, saying that such a formal alliance will happen if the other countries are as committed as the United States. This is not the first time the U.S. has floated the idea of a NATO-like military organization to confront its adversaries. The Trump administration had already called for the formation of an Arab NATO to confront what Washington describes as threats posed by Iran.
That the Indo-Pacific anti-China NATO will be as much of a failure as the Arab NATO, and if we were to recognize reality, the original NATO.
Military tensions have recently escalated between China and the U.S. China's military has warned of a, quote, unintentional military confrontation with the U.S. if it does not halt its naval operations in the South China Sea. Beijing insists that recent U.S. activities in the region are instigating such hostilities. The warning came after Chinese forces warned off a trespassing American guided missile destroyer in territorial waters of China's Jisha Islands. Chinese military was holding drills at the same area that reportedly included live-fire anti-ship ballistic missile launchers. China says American forces ignored international law by repeatedly stirring up troubles in the South China Sea. Beijing says Washington's claim of navigational hegemony in the name of freedom of navigation seriously undermines Beijing's sovereignty and security interests in the region.
I think the United States does need to come to a stable understanding with Beijing over where our spheres of influences, and let's use that old-fashioned term, are delineated so that we each stay on either side of the line. There's no reason for us to be messing about in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait.
Washington and Beijing are currently at loggerheads over a host of issues, including navigation in the East and South China Seas. The United States has been trying to push back against what it views as China's rising influence in the resource-rich South China Sea.
We are building a collection of countries to counter a Chinese threat. On the other side of the Pacific, having really nothing to do with us, I think it is quite misguided.
It has sided with China's rivals in maritime disputes in the sea. It's too early to see if US-backed plans for a military alliance against China will work. But one thing is for certain, the scheme will certainly add further tensions in the rocky relations between the two superpowers.